Well, thank you, everyone. Very happy to be here, talking with the organizers and the conveners. Today, I'm going to be talking about physics-informed machine learning for apparent polar wonder path estimation. I'm new to this community. I don't know most of you. I hope to get to know better today and tomorrow. So I thought it was a good idea to start introducing a little bit of myself. I came from the soccer nation of Argentina. Yes, very proud. You will see me around carrying a thermos and a mate. That's my drink. That's how you recognize me. But maybe more relevant for this talk, my background is in mathematics, physics, and then I did my PhD in Berkeley in statistics. So my area of interest in terms of research lies in kind of like this intersection between statistics and machine learning. I really care about open source and software development, things that I have been doing for the last couple of years, both in the Julia and Python ecosystem. But I like to work in these fields. I like to work in paleomagnetism. I like to globe. Also, a lot of my research is in glaciology. So I kind of like to think about these worlds of where we apply machine learning techniques into the geosciences. If you wonder, how did I get into paleomagnetism? Back in my undergrad, my first research project was in the paleomagnetism lab in Buenos Aires. And as Carlos Gardel says in his famous tango, you always come back to your first love. So this was like 10 years ago. I'm still here. Hopefully, I will stay here for a couple more years. But my title says physics-informed machine learning. So let's start talking about what is physics-informed machine learning. So many of you probably are familiar already with machine learning. What is this session about? So traditional machine learning models, for example, random forest, neural network, usually they lack interpretability, and they usually serve as black box. This is not always the case, but it's pretty much the norm for many machine learning models, particularly, So in this line that I'm going to be drawing during this slide, I'm going to put like black box machine learning models on this right side of this line, in what I call data-driven models. Are models that see the data, trying to find underlying patterns. They don't see any scientific or physical assumptions on this model or the objects we're trying to study. This is very common in regression problems. So when I mean regression is the general problem of predicting a response y as a function of x. So it's learning this function y as a function of x. However, science is in general being described by more complex mechanisms. We have some understanding of how the physical objects studies we work on behave. So usually science, most of the times, is on the other side of this line. We have constraints and we have differential equations, that we have models that we use to describe objects in nature. So this idea of physics-informed machine learning, it's a trend that has been very popularized in the last 5 to 10 years in the machine learning community, that has tried to compromise these two approaches, tried to compromise the constraints and the knowledge that we bring from the physical sciences with more data-driven approaches. So what I hope to deliver during this talk is an application of how to use physics-informed machine learning tools to estimate apparent polar wonder paths. So that's what this talk is going to be about. This is based in a recent preprint together with my collaborators here on the right. So before jumping into the machine learning weeds of this, let's start talking about apparent polar wonder paths. So apparent polar wonder paths are these tools that we use to describe paleomagnetic data. So they represent the relative position of the spin axis with respect to the reference system of a given continent, of a block of lithosphere. And these are very useful in paleogeography because under the assumption that the time average magnetic field is aligned with this direction of the spin rotation of the Earth, we can use this information to reconstruct the past motion of continents. As I'm showing in this gift here on the right, you can see how this little path here on the top is used to reconstruct the past motion of North America. Now, this is a very important task. I don't think I need to convince this audience that apparent polar wonder paths are important. They has been used since seminar papers up to the present. So the task of estimating apparent polar wonder path is intrinsically a building block in paleogeography and paleomagnetism. Now, how to fit an apparent polar wander path, how to estimate an apparent polar wander path. So the statistical challenge in fitting paths, apparent polar wander path, is that this belongs to the realm of statistical or directional statistics. It's something that statisticians have explored in the past, paleomagnetists have explored in the past, but most of the traditional statistical and regression methods are not designed to work in the sphere, or more generally in manifolds on surfaces. So this poses a challenge in terms of like which kind of techniques and which family of techniques we can use to estimate apparent polar wander paths. So just to give the visual picture, we are thinking for now and the rest of the talk that we have points in the sphere that are just described by their direction. We don't caring about the magnitude of the past magnetic field. We're just looking at directions in the sphere. So it's just directions, and we want to reconstruct how those directions move over time. And as you can imagine, these directions are very noisy. Now, of course, there are methods to do this. This is a figure for Torsvik et al. 2012. There's a compilation on paleopoles, and I'm showing this figure in particular for the case of Gondwana because you can see two of the most popular methods to do apparent polar wander path estimation. The first one is the running mean. It's a very simple algorithm. You just take a time window, you grab all the paleopoles in that time window, you take the Fisher mean on that, and you move the window into the past. So that allows you to reconstruct a path that in this case looks like this, where each one of the paleopoles in this case is represented by these little circles with respective uncertainties. Another very popular method that was popularized by Jupp and Kent in 1987, is splines regression. The result is on this plot. It's a bit more sophisticated than the running mean, but pretty much try to also fit paths on the sphere with some smoothness criteria. There is some smoothness about how the derivatives of the path should behave, and they have to change in a smooth fashion. Now, if you let me point at some parts of these reconstructions, you can see some points here. So for the first thing that catches my attention in this figure is whatever is happening here in both methods. So this could be like the paleomagnetic data is telling us that the plate is doing something very weird here, and that's how the data behaves. But maybe it's an artifact of the numerical method and the algorithm you're using for this. Maybe. So big question mark. The other thing that catch my attention are these two little sharp edges here. Again, maybe they are real stuff, but in particular, this little peak that goes down here is completely explained by one paleopole. And I'm going to come back to this later in the talk. So maybe we have evidence for this pole here and for the path to go this, but maybe not. So the idea is like, what else can we say about this problem with other regression techniques? Something very important is that all these methods fit directly trajectories in the sphere. They don't feed the rotation that we use then to reconstruct the past motion of the plate. And they suffer from different problems. So the running mean, first of all, is very sensitive to outliers. So if you have one paleopole that is far from the trend of the apparent polar wander path, that will distort the apparent polar wander path a lot. Again, we can discuss if that point is as an outlier or not, but it's very sensitive to outliers. So the statistician, that raises a red flag. Running mean is biased, so the path that you get is going to get a level of smoothness that may not be intrinsically encoded in the data. That's a problem, and also that bias is very sensitive to the size of these windows we pick, which if you're using running means, you know that's an important parameter on the running mean. And the other thing that I find here is there's no smoothness of this path. Like I showed in the previous slides, these apparent polar ones tend to be like highly non-smooth. On the other side, the spline regression method is also very sensitive to outliers, unless you impose a very strong sense of smoothness. You can do it. Algorithmic implementation of this is very complicated, and I'm not sure about open source available versions for using the splines up to this day. I may be wrong, please correct me. And something else introduces a very specific notion of smoothness, of how the apparent polar wander paths look like. And this is something also I would like to think more about. In all cases, the underlying rotation of the path has to be obtained a posteriori after we estimate the path. An alternative to this is what is called paleomagnetic Euler-Poyle analysis, or PEP, when we estimate directly rotation rather than the only dead trajectory of the path. But this comes at an important price, that is under the assumption that the Euler poles that generate these rotations, that generate the apparent polar wander path, are stable over some periods of time. There are papers in the literature that suggest that this may be the case, and that's great, and we can use that to model apparent polar wander path. But there may be reasons why this is not the case. Very complicated rotations, rotation of the plate on top of, for example, true polar wander, etc., etc. So I would say this is another alternative, but it just allows for the strong assumption that we're just going to fit what I could call piecewise rotations trajectories. So among the motivations to think at least about new techniques for apparent polar wander path estimation, I think for me the most important point is the first. Data, paleomagnetic data is scarce, is very rich, and is very difficult to obtain. So you want to choose paleopoles, take scientists a lot of effort, a lot of work, taking the samples, measuring. So I see a lot of value. Every time I work with paleopoles, it's like, this data is so rich, it's so hard to get this. So I want to think a little bit more about what do we do once we get this data. How to introduce different forms of physical constraints into the apparent polar wander path reconstruction, and this where the physics-informed machine learning flavor we came into role. How to model a combination of multiple sources of rotation. So for example, true polar wander plus the individual rotation of the plates. How can we fit apparent polar wander paths that look like that? How to naturally account both for temporal and directional noise in the data, which is the case, and how to automatically and statistically assess each possible model. So instead of thinking, well, this is my model for the apparent polar wander path, this is the other model for the apparent polar wander path, I think there is value in putting all these models in the same kind of framework and be able to compare them and be able to assess statistically what is the best one. I think this will bring one extra tool to the community in order to assess different reconstructions. So what's the proposal? So what I'm going to be talking for the rest of today is about introducing a tool that does, in principle, not introduce numerical artifacts. I can comment more of this. Allows for multiple scientific hypotheses, automatic calibration of model parameters, and introduce uncertainties. So we wrote this package called sphere-ude.julia. It's a Julia package that can also be executed in Python. I'm a big Julia fan, so I'm forced. The logo needs to have the Julia colors. I cannot publish a Julia package without the Julia colors, but it can also be used for Python. So what is the workflow behind UDE, and where is the physics-informed machine learning in all this stuff? So let me walk you through this workflow here. Let's start from the first point, going from spherical data to data that naturally is constrained on the sphere. How do we constrain this path to be on the sphere? And we're going to do that using differential equations. I love differential equations. It's the language of many research areas in physics, and they're just so really cool. So the way that I'm going to model apparent polar wander path is as the solution of a very simple ordinary differential equation. So we have this result in the paper that shows that any possible continuous curve in the sphere, every possible thing you can draw here can be described exactly as the numerical solution or the solution of a differential equation that looks like that. dx dt, how much the direction changes over time, equals to the cross product of L of t, which is going to be the Euler pole, is going to be the vector that describes exactly the rotation happening at each single time cross x of t. A very simple ordinary differential equation that preserves the norm. For every time t, x is a vector of unit norm 1. And this is great, because now the data is naturally constrained on the sphere. All these statistical problems about how do I make the data to be in the sphere, let's project it, let's take the Fisher mean. Now the differential equation is dealing with that for us. And the nice thing is, like, the differential equation makes very explicit what is the Euler pole, which is what we are after. We want that Euler pole that describes the direction of the rotation plus the magnitude of that rotation in order to reconstruct the past motion of the plates. Second piece, inverse modeling. So we need to find a way to learn this function, this Euler pole as a function of time. And for this is what I use universal differential equations. So universal differential equations, UDEs, then the UDEs in the sphere D, is a particular type of physics-informed machine learning technique. It's a data-driven method that includes physical knowledge in the form of differential equations, just as I showed you before, and consists in embedding a neural network inside the differential equation. So that L of t, that Euler pole as a function of time, is going to be parametrized with a differential equation. So UD is like in this nice intersection between numerical methods, because we need to solve the differential equation and we need to optimize, data-driven methods, because we're putting a neural network inside our model, and physics, we dictated by the differential equation, and the regularizations are going to impose on that. So this is a little bit the philosophy, or one way of thinking about the philosophy of physics-informed machine learning is make use as much existing physical knowledge as possible, and just use regressors or any kind of machine learning model for the pieces of the equations that you are not that certain. So it's a compromise. Finally, inversions are based on differential programming, for example, automatic differentiation. I'm not going to dig into this during this talk, but if someone is interested, we have a review paper, particularly on how to solve these inverse problems, how to compute gradients, how to do gradient set, et cetera, et cetera. For the purpose of this talk, this is something that has been done very smoothly in the Julia ecosystem, reason why sphere D is written in Julia. So this is how the picture looks like now. We have the paths on the sphere, we have our points, we have our Euler pole describing this instant rotation at any given time, and we're going to parameterize this rotation as a function of time as the output of a small neural network that takes time as an input and returns a three-dimensional vector. And we're going to minimize a loss function that compares the obtained path after solving the differential equation with observational data. Last step is regularization. This is a word that statisticians love to use. Regularization means constraint. It means structuring the solutions we're looking at. So the Euler pole as a function of time can look in many different ways. How do we constrain the way those Euler poles look like, depending on our physical assumptions of how the plate should move? So in a sphere D, we define different regularization terms that allow us to include from different assumptions. Mathematically, there is an equation. What I like about this equation is that there are two hyperparameters, P and K. K dictates the order of the derivative of this Euler pole we are looking at. P is just the power of the norm. So if we're just interested, for example, in a small angular velocities, we just graph the Euler pole, we take its norm, that gives us the angular velocity, and we regularize that. We make that small. So the rotation cannot be that far. If we take k equals 1, so we take first order derivative and we take the square of the true norm, that gives us something similar, not exactly the same, that the smoothing splice method from Jupp and Kett in 1987. And if we want piecewise rotations, we can also get that into this framework by taking also the first derivative, but now penalizing not by the power 2 of the norm, by power 1. So power 2 is L true norm. Power 1 is what is called group lasso. It's a time of penalty that is going to enforce sparsity. So it's going to allow these abrupt changes in the apparent polar wonder path, just as we do in PEP. So the complete pipeline looks something like this. First, we use a differential equation to constrain the data to lie on the sphere. Second, we use a neural network to learn that Euler pole, to parameterize that Euler pole. Third, we define a loss function as a combination of empirical error plus regularization, and this could be one of the terms that I showed you before, or something new. And finally, the optimization. The optimization behind that is based on also a very nice, something the statisticians love to say all the time, but it's based on a maximum likelihood model. So there is a probabilistic model behind this model that allows you to incorporate, for now, directional data. So the data is distributed according to a Fisher distribution with a customized concentration parameter that you can provide, or you can potentially also parameterize and learn. But all this, it's based on, like, I just wrote error to make things simpler, but there is a probabilistic model behind that allows you to account for now for directional data, and hopefully in the future for uncertainty also in time. So let me show you some examples. I'm going to start with synthetic examples for now. So this is the noiseless curl. It's an apparent polar wanded path, or just a path in the sphere that looks like this curl. Very nice. It's described by an unstable Euler pole. So the Euler pole, you can think the rotation is kind of like in the middle of this little curl, so it's moving in the same longitude, just moving down in latitude. It's a path that loops back on itself. So that makes it kind of challenging both for the running mean and the splines. And we're going to now use regularization here, which makes sense because for noiseless data, you really don't need regularization. More than happy to talk more about this. But we have this path, we train, the loss function goes down, and we just feed this data. So you cannot see it in the first plot, but actually the fitted line is a black line on top of the color points. If we make a transect on both longitude and latitude, you can see how the path bound by sphere D goes exactly on the points, and also is able to, up to some error, estimate the direction of the Euler pole plus the angular velocity describing that Euler pole. So synthetic example number one, so far so good. Synthetic example number two is a bit more challenging. This is the case of piecewise rotations that look like PEP analysis. We are using our lasso regularization in the derivatives. And our synthetic example here is just having two rotations and adding some noise. The noise is controlled by the kappa parameter, by the concentration parameter, from less noisy to more noisy from left to right. And we can see that we are still able to reconstruct the path. As you increase the noise, you can see there is more mismatch between the inverted rotations. This also makes sense, and you increase the noise because there are potentially many Euler poles with different angular velocities that fit your data pretty much well. This is a well-known problem in the literature, so you expect this to be the case. The other thing I'm going to point out too is like there are a little bit of like this peak here stuff. That's also a result of the inversion. It's a problem with some kind of a Gibbs problem happening with the neural network. I'm not that worried about this. I think I know how to fix this, but there is a little thing here that probably is just an artifact on the inversion. But in general, this looks quite fine. Now, let's go to real data. Going back to the apparent polar wander path of Gondwana, we are grabbing the data set collected in Torsvik et al. 2012, which consists in 194 paleopoles for the last 500 million years. Directional synthetses are reported in the data set and also used for the inversions. This is an interesting problem because there are many different reconstructions in the literature. And now we're going to really use smoothness regularization. So we're going to constrain the path to be a bit more smooth. And this is what we obtain using sphere. The big features look the same. We can see like the path, just like that, going from south to north, making that loop, going to the left. You can also see how this fits the trajectory, but I want to call your attention to specific points. The first one is this area here that I was complaining about in the first slides, where the apparent polar wander path using running means and the splines methods do some wiggling here. Could be real, it could be not. CUD introduces a stronger notion of smoothness, so that part seems to be a little bit more smooth. The other part are these points here. So in the original reconstructions, the reason why the apparent polar wander path goes down again is one single paleopole. It has been debated in the literature if this pole is a proof or an example of true polar wander. This could be completely the case, so big question mark there. What I'm showing in this slide here is like, in principle, with this notion of smoothness, our methods estimate that going down and up, it's not in the signal. This doesn't mean there is no true polar wander. This is just a method to allow to test for different hypotheses. So for example, you can account for true polar wander in sphere, and I think that's one of the most interesting things to do looking at the future. But it's important to say, like, this pole in the south, there are references in the literature saying like, this is actually real, this is true polar wander, and that could be completely right. How do we pick the smoothest parameters? This is usually a big challenge. So here I'm showing a very classical analysis. It's just an L curve. You plot the empirical error versus the regularization. If everything is nice, which usually is not the case. You see something that looks like an L. This kind of looks like an L, I guess. Not perfect. These methods are not perfect, but you kind of can identify the knot. Usually the knot is associated to the best choice of that hyperparameter. And we're showing here that this choice of hyperparameter corresponds exactly to the choice of the apparent polar wonder path estimate that I showed you in the previous slide. When if you reduce or you increase the hyperparameter, the thing gets more complicated, more simplified. As I'm wrapping up, I just want to emphasize about the software. I think there is a lot of value in writing robust and reproducible software. Packaging testing, this is a lot of my day-to-day life. I'm built on top of complementary and existing tools, including the Julia automatic differentiation library, PyMacPy in Python. So again, we use sphere.de, we're using Julia, but there is this very cool stuff that you can connect Python and Julia code, and you can call from Julia code from Python code from Julia. So sphere.de really relies on this. We make progress faster and better when working interdisciplinary, collaborative, and community-driven. And sphere.de is a Julia library that can be used from Python and can be used for any person interested. So I'm more than curious if you try it. I'm open to criticism. This is open source software. Most likely you try it and it may fail for some other cases. So I want to know when it fails. This is work in progress. Like this is ongoing work in progress. Science is a long-term endeavor. So main takeaways from this talk, I show you that physics-informed machine learning is a way, it's not the only way, it's a way of constraining data-driven models with physics, so that's pretty cool. I introduced sphere.de for apparent polar wonder path estimation. Parentheses, this can be used for any regression problem in the sphere. So if you're thinking about data that lies in the sphere, directional data, and you want to fit it, but it's not an apparent polar wonder path, that also works. Like the tool is still should work there. Sphere.de allows you to model different apparent polar wonder paths depending on the hypothesis via a custom regularization term, as I show you with the synthetic and the real example. Depending what you're looking for, you can go for that. And this is an open source library that anyone can use, criticize, destroy, report bugs, or contribute, more importantly. Next steps and challenges for me is the exploration of regularization terms based on different geophysical assumptions. How do we constrain the way these apparent polar wonder paths look like based on existing knowledge in geophysical models, for example? I'm particularly very excited about the use of sphere.de to model the combined effect of true polar wonder in all the plates on Earth with the individual plane motion of individual plates. So that's something we can do with sphere.de because we can model these rotations separately. So I'm very excited about that. Introduction of non-paleomagnetic constraints in the rotations. That's something also you can do because you have a loss function and you can add any kind of constraints you want in the optimization problem. Something that I think is very interesting is the computation of time uncertainties. We almost have something in that direction, and also what is called time registration. So time registration is the problem of not just adding noise to time, but also being able to adjust if the time is wrong and learn those times. And something that is also pretty cool and moving forward is something we'll do is uncertainty quantification of this path. So a few years ago, I was like, I'm not doing point estimation anymore. Fitting a point is fine, fitting as fine is fine, but we really need to rely on uncertainties on these objects to see how that affects the final deliberate. And that's it. Thank you so much.